Hello, everyone, and on behalf of the V&A's Culture in Crisis programme, welcome to today's event, Understanding the Illicit Trade Under ISIS in Syria. My name is Laura Searson, and I'm the Cultural Heritage Preservation Lead at the V&A, and as ever, your host for today's event. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by two wonderful guests who are going to be telling us all about their new research into the illicit trade of cultural property in Syria under the ISIS regime. So from the regulated looting of heritage sites to the systems of trade and management which traffic archaeological finds out of the country, we're going to be taking a look at the new evidence compiled by these scholars, which brings to light the practice and the prevalence of these activities. Joining me today are Dr. Neil Brodie and Dr. Isbert Sabrine. Neil and Isbert have recently co-authored and published a paper entitled Some New Evidence Documenting the Involvement of Daesh in Syria with the Illicit Trade in Antiquity. And I'm shortly going to drop that link into the chat as we move through today's event, so you can all take a look in your own time. In the next hour, we're going to be hearing from Neil and Isbert so that they can share thoughts and research considering areas like the role of local communities in understanding and preventing looting, the international attention span and media myths that surround these activities, and their recommendations for a global approach to tackling the illicit trade for good. So in a moment, I'm going to introduce you to the speakers, but as usual, I take a moment just to say a word about the role of you all in our audience today. Our ambition for Culture in Crisis events is always the same. It's to try and involve new voices and include as many perspectives as possible. And obviously I can't do that on my own. So I'm going to need all of your support in bringing to light some of the different views or posing different questions and generally doing some of my hard work for me. Please use the chat to do that. Let us know your thoughts and questions, and I'll do my best to factor them into the conversation which we'll have in the second half of this event. If you are doing that, just a friendly reminder that if you could put the drop-down menu to say send to both panel and attendees so that I get to see them and so does the rest of the audience and we can all join in the conversation together. So now you've heard that call for collaboration, and whilst I ask our speakers to briefly introduce themselves, please do as you're already doing. Drop us a line in the chat and let us know who you are and where you're joining from today. So as I mentioned, I'd like to welcome on Dr. Neil Brodie and Dr. Isbert Sabrine. Hello. Lovely to see you. I'm going to hand straight over to you both so you can tell the audience a little bit about yourself and your role. Neil, over to you.
Thank you, Laura. Well, I'm Neil Brodie. I'm based at the Endangered Archaeology of the Middle East and North Africa project at the University of Oxford, which is funded by the Archaeology Fund. And I'm the specialist there on the illicit trade in antiquities and other cultural objects.
Hi everyone, I'm Isbert Sabrine, the director of and the co-founder of Heritage for Peace. Heritage for Peace, an international NGO working on the protection of cultural heritage during conflict. It's my pleasure. Thank you very much, Laura, for organizing this important webinar to explain our recent research on ISIS and illicit trafficking.
No, you're very welcome. It's a pleasure to have you both with us. We're going to kick off with two presentations, both relatively short ones. So it's a bit of a tour de force of the brilliant research that Neil and Isbert have been up to. We're going to start with Neil, who will tell us a bit about the research paper itself, and follow on with Isbert, who's going to talk a little bit more about communities involved in this project. So that's enough from me. I think we'll hand straight over to Neil.
Right, thank you. Right, I hope you can all see this. This paper really, I'm talking for three people, myself, Isbert, who is here in this meeting, and also Rustam Abdo, who is based in Syria, so I don't think he's here with us today. And this is research that the three of us conducted inside Syria last year, and it has just been published in a paper here you can see in the Journal of Eastern Mediterranean Archaeology and Heritage Studies. And what I want to do today in the time available is just briefly talk around the background to this paper and discuss some highlights maybe, and then give a bit of a retrospect as well, you know, looking back, what we think now. So if you really want to get into the meat of the paper, I'm afraid you're going to have to download it and read it. And there's lots of interesting things in there to read. As the title of the paper showed, we were concerned with the looting and illicit trade of antiquities under Daesh in Syria, and we can see here the timeline. Really, the period of occupation was between early 2013 and late 2017. So there's a period there of about four and a half years where Daesh occupied large parts of Syria. We see a map there. The maximum territorial control in 2015 is coloured light brown. Well, you can see it's northeast, large parts of northeastern Iraq also Syria, also extending into Iraq. And this is the area of our study area. Again, you can see the area of northeastern Iraq, which was under Daesh control during the period in question. Some modern sites there marked in black, and also archaeological sites in red. Now, not soon after Daesh had occupied Raqqa in Syria, this newspaper article appeared in the New York Times, and it revealed that Daesh was levying a 20% tax on antiquities sales inside Syria, and it had introduced a system of governance and was licensing excavations. And this was quite interesting because before this, we knew there was a lot of looting going on in Iraq, but we thought it was relatively disorganized, really. There was obviously a war going on, and we thought people were taking advantage of the disturbed conditions to loot archaeological sites, and indeed they'd be forced to loot archaeological sites by the poverty caused by the war. But it looked here as though Daesh was actually taking control and organizing it, and kind of incorporating it into its economy. So this seemed to be an important development. And it was confirmed the following year when US Special Forces raided the headquarters of Abu Sayyaf, who was the Daesh operative in charge of organizing the antiquities trade. And they seized various antiquities and documents, importantly, relating to the Daesh control of the antiquities trade. We see some of the documents there. And this, by and large, confirmed the report that had been in the New York Times. And for example, from the documents, it suggested that between December 2014 and March 2015, Daesh collected $265,000 US through a 20% tax. And that meant that, so the total trade would have been about $1.3 million. So this was all quite sensible and very helpful. This was a lot less helpful. In June 2014, there was an article in The Guardian. An arrest in Iraq had revealed that ISIS or Daesh had a $2 billion jihadist network. And they came out with these massive inflated figures about the value of the antiquities trade to Daesh. And this just triggered off a whole wave of newspaper reporting, some of it good, some of it not so good, and some of it just out and out sensationalist. And we can see some of the headlines there: Islamic State nets millions from antiquities, blood antiquities, ISIS 2 billion jihadist network, and so on and so forth. ISIS smugglers making up to $1 million per item selling ancient antiquities looted from the rubble of Syria. So there are all these headlines, and they grab the world's attention. I'm sure anybody who was around at the time remembers this. And it just seemed to degenerate, really. So there's all looting in Iraq was suddenly being blamed on Daesh. And this was an article, for instance, in the Daily Mail, blaming the looting of Apamea in Western Syria on Daesh and saying there were coins available on eBay. But in actual fact, Daesh had been looted years before, well, a few years before Daesh were in control of Syria, and in a different part of Syria anyway. So it seemed that basically the whole problem of looting and illicit trade in Syria, it was suddenly being laid at the feet of Daesh. It was though, it hadn't existed before, and suddenly it was there, and it was massive, and they were making millions or billions of dollars. And there's this huge panic. And the people were clamoring that something needed to be done. The newspapers were, the media was, and politicians were. There were more sober assessments. There was this map produced in 2015 by the ASOR in the United States, I think based on the work of Jessica Sana, I think probably. And it showed that in actual fact, using satellite imagery, you could show that the looting that was going on was in different areas of control right across Syria. It wasn't just the Islamic State and Daesh. And so it's interesting now to think back when we look at these news articles. I mean, you know, fake news, clickbait, whatever you want to call it. I mean, why was it happening? Was it just lazy misreporting? Were people just looking for headlines? The sensationalist misreporting, people were looking for headlines to sell more newspapers or attract more clicks. Or was it politically motivated? I think some of it probably was politically motivated. People were trying to divert attention onto Daesh and away from other factions inside Syria. And this really, I think, leads to the process of policy failure. So you have this looting and illicit trade that we all agree is a problem. But if it's generating newspaper headlines and then the public and the politicians are reacting to the newspaper headlines, they're coming out with policy decisions which are really uninformed. They're just reacting to newspaper headlines, and they're coming out with policies which are uninformed, not very good, and they're not really likely to be effective against the problem in the first place. And what we really want is proper evidence-based research as to what's really happening with the looting and illicit trade, so the public and particularly the politicians have hard evidence on which to base their policies. The policies are likely to be more effective and actually do something to eradicate looting and illicit trade. So we were thinking about this, and ISPA and I have been talking about it for several years, really. And we thought, what we really wanted, we really needed a proper evidence-based account of looting under Daesh in Syria that might inform future policy making. So we wanted facts, not fictions. And the rationale was that after the defeat of Daesh, there should be a lot of information available inside Syria documenting its activities. And researchers inside Syria could be mobilized to access and report upon this information. And the information obtained about the structure and the organization of the trade inside Syria, it should be globally relevant, so it should be applicable to other countries. And for a methodology, we thought we could interview people inside Syria with first-hand experience of Daesh activities. We could collect images of looted objects. I mean, everyone these days has a cell phone, so there are lots of images. Report and photograph damage at archaeological sites, and also, if possible, collect Daesh administrative documents. So this is our concept, really. We're going from the local to the global, and we have this converging four-path methodology. We were gathering together the local researchers on the ground to conduct research, but the research itself would have a global impact. And we saw this really to be a pilot project or a proof of concept. We were showing that this research was possible, and we wanted to show the kind of results that we could produce. So I'll just briefly run through it. As I say, you really need to read the paper. These were photographs of looted sites that were obtained. I think down there on the bottom left, even using drone photography. So it's very, well, I wouldn't say it's easy to access these sites, but these sites are now accessible. And it's possible to photograph the damage and map the damage and quantify the damage. For interviews, we interviewed 4 people inside Syria who had lived and worked under Daesh and who had first-hand experience of their actions. And they provided us, we were interested to get information about the prices of objects and how the market worked. And they were also able to obtain images of antiquities said to have been sold inside Syria. And these are some of the images that were available. These are said to be from the Bronze Age site of Mari. It's from the Neo-Assyrian site of Tel Ajaja. That's the site we saw a few slides ago with all the holes peppered across its top. Rustam was intrepid and managed to lead a rescue excavation or a rescue exploration of a bombed out Daesh headquarters building in Raqqa, and was able to recover a lot of administrative documents relating to the activities of Daesh, which still need to be processed. These documents confirm Daesh control of the trade, as we've known from 2014. The one on the left there, it's a script for a test. People have to pass a test showing that they would observe all the relevant laws and regulations and so on and so forth. And on the right there is a receipt recording the sale of some antiquities. So the project findings, we thought four in the conclusion of the paper. We came up really, I think, with 4 new findings. As I say, we confirmed previous reports about the taxation and the organisation. But we showed that there are a lot of previously unknown archaeological sites that were uncovered by looting in Syria, and they're in urgent need of documentation. And this looting wasn't all by Daesh. There was a lot of looting before Daesh, and in the area and we were studying, the Free Syrian Army was particularly prominent. And there seemed to be continuity in some ways in the organisation of looting and trafficking, and that the same excavators and dealers seemed to continue to work throughout. So they weren't introduced by Daesh. The criminal economy was there already. The looting and trafficking already existed, and Daesh inserted itself into this pre-existing criminal economy to profit from it. All transactions were conducted in US dollar bills, that's actual hard US dollar bills. So we knew that Daesh was controlling the trade to profit financially, but it might also have been controlling the trade to obtain hard foreign currency. So it might have been the foreign currency in terms of dollar bills, which is important as much as there's the financial profit. And the fact that large quantities of US dollar bills were coming into Syria to buy these antiquities from outside, and the antiquities were then moved out of the country for sale abroad, and quite possibly legitimate sale abroad. It also suggests the existence of trade-based money laundering. But again, this possibility is in need of further investigation. And we obtained a large quantity of information about pricing inside Syria, which will benefit future research on the pricing structure of the trade more generally. So looking back now, a couple of years after we did this research, looting in Syria was headline news from 2014 to 2016, but now it's hardly mentioned. Oh, why is it no longer mentioned? Has it stopped? We know it hasn't stopped. And there's a problem here that policy follows the media. So policy development and international actions follow what are defined as emergencies, as we saw in Syria under Daesh, and we see today for Ukraine. But this 5 brigade policy of following the emergencies, it does nothing to combat the illicit trade globally, and it does nothing to prevent the next emergency. I'm developing this concept of dark emergencies. So at the moment, we know the war in Ukraine is threatening to disrupt grain exports to countries in the Middle East. And rising food prices there might force more people to loot archaeological sites in many countries outside the Ukraine. But is the international community ready? And the emergency here is rippling outwards, but any consequent looting won't be reported upon and will attract little international action. And further afield, here's a report published in 2022 about Sri Lanka. And again, serious economic decline. Some people will turn to looting. And this is Sri Lanka. This is a headline about Sri Lanka a few weeks ago. Sri Lanka defaults on debts for the first time. So if there's an economic collapse in Sri Lanka, is there going to be an increase in looting there? And it says economists fear Sri Lanka could be the first of several, with Egypt, Tunisia and Pakistan also mentioned there. Well, will the media attention be on these countries if looting and trafficking does break out there? So I think the final thing I want to say before handing over to Isper is to ask, are we ready for dark emergencies whenever and wherever they are? And I think the sad answer at the moment is that we aren't. So thank you, and I'll now hand over to Isper.
Thank you for that, Neil. And whilst Isper just loads up his screen, it's been great to see so many of you already joining in the chat. Please do feel free to go straight ahead and start popping questions into the chat as we collate them. And as we follow Isper's presentation, we'll be able to bring them all together for a discussion at the end. And I can see there's a huge wealth of experience in the audience. Please do join in and contribute questions where you can.
So I am now will give some thoughts in order to support the discussions, and also these are some thoughts as well from experience on hand on the ground. Actually, we have a big policy failure on fighting illegal excavation and illicit traffic in the world. And my talk, it will be also kind of recommendations or some about how we can also work in order to empower civil society to fight illicit traffic in countries in conflict. I will talk about some practical experience on that, and this, I hope that the policymakers, they will take they will consider these ideas in order to fight illicit traffic in the world. So first of all our work in the last years was through our organization, Heritage for Peace. So Heritage for Peace is an international group of heritage workers who believe that cultural heritage is a common ground for dialogue and tool to enhance peace. Our mission is to support heritage workers indifferent of citizenship or religion as they work towards the protection of cultural heritage for future generations. Our work started in Syria, but with the years we extend our work to more countries. So we work now in Yemen, Iraq, Libya, and recently in Ukraine. Here I will talk about some of the practical ideas which I mentioned that we are working. So Heritage for Peace, since 3 years, launched the Arab network of civil society organization to save cultural heritage. So we noticed that in heritage in conflict, always the civil society and was really very upset of implementation of action, and the role was very limited. In countries in Middle East and North Africa, I mean, Syria, Iraq, Yemen, Libya, we noticed that a lot of local groups, they were created in order to protect cultural heritage. That we, in Syria, a lot of local groups in areas in under the control of non-armed, not state actors. So where there is Syrian opposition groups, or even some Islamic groups, the same thing as well in Yemen under the Houthi government, or in Libya, in East Libya, where there is not recognized governments. So the international heritage organization like UNESCO and its partner, they just work with a recognized government. So our work within this year was in order to support these local groups which are under in the regions where they are not recognized government, and also in the regions where they are a recognized government. But what we did is to launch ANSH. It was initiatives by Heritage for Peace, a network of a lot of civil society organization in 4 countries, and now, I mean, it was created for the Arab countries, but now our work is concentrated in Syria, Iraq, Yemen, and Libya. It was created with support of the Spanish National Research Council, and also with the support of Aleph organization. So in this, in the creation of ANSH, we brought together heritage authorities, civil society representatives, and also international experts on heritage production. ANSH, as an initiative, worked to create a network of civil society organizations to identify and define heritage production projects needed in the Arab countries, enhance the visibility of civil society organizations and their work, empower local community participation in the management of cultural heritage, foster inclusive social development and inclusive economic development. Here are some of the examples of our groups in Syria, Iraq, Yemen, and Libya. Because at the time I cannot mention everyone, but here are some examples. You can see all the information in ANSH website. So through ANSH, we try to work to empower local and civil society organization, and also with one of the main objects is to fight illegal excavation and illicit traffic. So through ANSH, we were able in the last years to develop several projects. Those projects, some of them are ongoing, and some of them still they need more developments. And those projects, I will talk very shortly about these projects. First, with the support of the Spanish National Research Council, Heritage for Peace created an app, a Pacton app, which is a very practical app, simple app, is used to give to people who are working on the ground. So with this app, the people, they can as well document heritage destruction, looted heritage sites, and we also through this app now we tested in several regions in Syria, and we hope now in our future projects on controlling illicit traffic from Syria and countries in conflict, we will use this app in more places. So this app here you will see it works in this way. We have several NGOs, local groups, they use this app, and with this app they send to us. We have collect the database, and with this database we try as well to make a monitor of an international market as well when we have some information and we are sure about that these are looted objects, so we can share this information with Interpol, ICOM, UNESCO, heritage authorities. Also, the ideas that we are working also to have a panel of experts on archaeologists on several periods. So we like that we can control where those objects are coming from. On the other hand, with the support of Gerda Henkel Stiftung in Germany, since a few years, we are doing this project, which is shelter project. This project is a project as well focusing on the legal, create a local tool, a legal tool in order to empower communities, especially as well imams. So in area in Syria where there are no control by governments, there are Islamic courts. So in this project, we are still now developing it. We hope this project we will raise awareness on the importance of protection of heritage in local communities, improve legal understanding of heritage protection, with heritage workers and community leaders. So the imams, especially in Arab and Muslim countries, they play a huge role in raising awareness about society needs. So mitigate illegal excavation and illicit traffic in areas under those Islamic courts, reduce booklet on local production of heritage in present Syria, and raise awareness about relationship between heritage and Islam outside the country. So this project as well, I mean, still under developing. We are creating an e-learning course in which heritage workers and also community leaders like imams, they can get more knowledge about how they can have this legal tool in order to fight and to protect, fight illicit traffic, and also to increase the protection of cultural heritage. Very briefly, with Raqqa, I mean, we are working in Raqqa since 2 years. We are working with a project called Traffickatuna, and with the support of the Cultural Protection Fund of the British Council. It was a project to, in order to document and also the heritage destruction in Raqqa. And to make inventory of the heritage. So it was focused on Raqqa city, but also this, within this project, we were able to train a lot of locals on heritage, and also issues on heritage, heritage preservation, heritage controlling illicit traffic, and documenting as well looted heritage. Looted archaeological site was delivered. So in this project, I had the opportunity to go to Raqqa and also to learn more in hands about the looting and about the period of ISIS in Raqqa. So the visit to Raqqa last year also helped me to make different interviews with people. So here in this photo is these two people in an archaeological sites around like 25 kilometers from Raqqa. It was a storage house of the archaeological missions in the province of Raqqa. So talking to those people, they are the guards of this archaeological site. I learned how really ISIS was trying to search objects. And these two women told me, you know, that she worked in order to hide the archaeological objects. But in the end, people talked about those two ISIS people, and ISIS came and they threatened her and her family to kill if they will not tell them where are the sites and where are the objects. So just, I mean, in this storage house, ISIS was able to loot a lot of objects. We don't know. I mean, especially the recording of the materials were very poor. So this is one of the experience that I had, and I mean a lot of sad stories about how ISIS was in Raqqa, and how the people also are suffering from Daesh till now. I mean, horrible stories. In the end, I just want to talk about another work also that we are doing within the Palmyrene community in the diaspora. And in this project, Palmyrene Voices Initiatives, it's an initiative to give voice to Palmyrene people who were excluded of all the big discussion in the international media. You know, all the media was talking about the destruction of Palmyra, but nobody was talking about the people. So within the people of Palmyra, I mean, a lot of people as well, we are trying as well to identify looted materials from Palmyra. So refugees and people who lived in Palmyra, they can tell a lot of stories about looting from Palmyra. And still, as you know, in the international market, there are a lot of looting, and a lot of objects are from Palmyra. So through Palmyrene Voices as well, we are trying to control and to identify looted objects from Palmyra. This a little bit an overview about what we do. And again, what I will say that really, I mean, if we want to work on controlling illicit traffic, we should also consider the humanitarian action. I mean, people who are working who are on heritage sites, they need really humanitarian aid. So always with Neil, when we started our work on this issue, we think that connecting humanitarian aid to control illicit traffic, it's really a crucial object in order to fight illicit traffic. In that discussion, we will talk more about policy recommendation and more discussion. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Isfa, and thank you, Neil, as well, because those are two really enlightening presentations that have done quite a lot to stimulate some terrific questions in the chat. I have to share my role with the audience, but as the host, I'm entitled to go first. So I'm going to use that go really to come back to you, Isfa, first and foremost, to talk a little bit about the role of local communities in your research and how they've been gathering evidence. And what's a responsible project really doing about engaging local communities to approach the prevention of the illicit trade? And I'll go to Isba, but Neil, please do feel free to chime in as well. Isba, to you first.
Sorry, just to repeat the question.
It's just about the role of local communities in your research and the kind of engagement that you went for, how it worked, and what were the learning points from it?
Yeah, actually, as we also use in our work with Neil, they are the most important elements that we really need them. So from them, we can get a lot of information. So all the work we developed with Neil, it was because we have a good network on the ground. And with them, I mean, especially, you know, in Syria, a lot of people, they are like very, they communicate a lot. I mean, when they are a looted object or when they are, so I mean, even we were able to identify within locals photos and information about looted objects. So this is one of the things that our information are from the people, and our research is based on the evidence that we get from the people. So through them, as well as I told you, with the shelter projects that we intend as well, and with the other projects in Raqqa, we did a lot of raising awareness within the people in schools, and also we talk about looting and how it's bad, you know. So so the role of the local community also should we in heritage projects. All kinds of heritage projects, and this is something we learned. They should really be focused on raising awareness with the community. And this is something, because the people, they don't know really. I mean, if you see all our countries, the heritage education in schools or was so far, you know, So so all heritage projects, no matter what are of restoration, of documentation, what are, they need really to bring the issue of fighting illicit trafficking, or fighting illegal excavation to the people. So this is some of the things that we learned.
Thank you, Isba. Neil, actually, I'm just going to jump in here and try and merge a few of the questions that have come into the chat as your presentation was finishing up here. And they're really all around the kind of the law, the enforcement of sentencing, and museums buying loot, really. But the questions have broadly been about how the laws prohibiting the trade of antiquities have worked. Have they been working? Why are they working, as Emily's asking, and what can we do to make sure that they do? And Bob references the recent custodial sentence there for the geologist in Iraq. And I wonder if you can draw some of this together just to talk about how we prevent the trade in terms of a kind of singular approach.
Yeah, I mean, I think the case of the British tourist is a good example of everything going wrong. There are lots of laws in place, but to my mind, they're very poorly enforced. And it's easy to go after little fish, but not so easy to go after big fish. So, you know, you'll end up with like a naive British tourist in Baghdad who's got, you know, not a lot of material. I'm sure there have been lots of Iraqis arrested in Iraq on charges related to looting, but these are all the small fish. And it doesn't really do much to tackle the problem. You really need to go after the big fish. The really big international dealers who are profiting from this trade. And it's no secret who they are and where they are, but they just seem to be above any kind of law enforcement. And I think that's the problem, really. I think there has to be much better collaborative international investigation of the big fish and to try and stop them trading, really. And there's probably, you know, I'm sure if there are any police or law enforcement officers in the audience, they'll tell me how hard that is. But that's it, really. You know, and I honestly think that's the solution. You can't just ignore these big dealers and just let them get on with things while arresting people at the bottom of the trading chain or whatever. I don't think that's working. So I think the laws generally, I mean, there are lots of laws. I think the problem is the enforcement of the laws. I think that's the problem.
Is there anything you want to add on that one?
Yeah, actually, regarding to the law, I mean, we have a big lag in the countries in conflict in order to implement the international heritage law. I mean, Syria and the countries where we are work, I mean, they still they have laws which are from the 1963, and they are not updated with the Hague Conventions. They are not updated as well with the UNESCO Convention of 1970. So, I mean, even the people who are working on heritage, they lack, this knowledge, and this there is as well. There are no specialized people on this issue. So, I mean, we are trying, and we are still working in this idea as a shelter project in order to create a tool also in Arabic and in English, in which we will deliver it to the people who are working on heritage, especially, and we think that it's also important to bring Islamic law and to the domestic law and to the international law. This project, I mean, we are developing as well with support of our colleagues, Emma Conley from Blue Shield and from other colleagues. And we hope soon, we are still developing this tool, the e-learning, which it will be a tool, could be used in different countries. Just we need to change the domestic law. I mean, even now, recently we were discussing about how this is also important to, especially in regimes like in Afghanistan, how the Taliban also should have some knowledge, about heritage and Islamic heritage law in order to face the production of cultural heritage. So, I mean, we need to work more and keep tools to the people who are working on the ground, legal tools.
Thank you, Isper. There's a couple of questions here as well about sort of sensationalist reporting and these myths in the media, as we've called them earlier, and what the impact of this misreporting really is. Neil, you touched on this slightly in your presentation, and that process of how misreporting in the press can lead to politicians or even governments adapting and adopting different practices. Do you want to talk a little bit more here about the potential impacts of media myths and international attention as well? Because I think there is a great deal of shaping that's done by the peaks and troughs of attention. And Louise has said this with the sensationalist reporting in Germany, specifically here, and that's saying that new laws were enacted as a reaction to this, but little evidence actually showed that it changed much in the market. So it's a bit of a sprawling question here, but maybe a few comments on the impact of misreporting or even sensational reporting in the media.
I think there are two issues. One, it grabs political attention, or it might be more accurate to say it sucks in political attention. So political attention is sucked in and diverted away from other areas, which might be equally deserving. And then two, it misrepresents the problem. So any policy countermeasure is actually tackling with an imagined problem rather than a real problem. My little gripe at the moment is there were various measures brought in as a result of Daesh. There were new money laundering regulations brought in. I think there was the European Union import control. And these laws were all brought in response to the Daesh headlines, making millions and millions and millions of dollars out of the trade. But they all incorporate quite significant financial thresholds. So they only apply to objects over a certain value. They don't apply to low value objects. But then, of course, if you look what was being sold on the ground in Syria, a lot of it was low value objects. So a lot of the material which was being bought and sold and which was funding Daesh on the ground is excluded from any of the laws which were introduced to combat that, because the people who were drafting the laws didn't really fully understand what the problem was, what the material was that was being traded, and what the value of the material was that was being traded. So the laws end up, as I was trying to say, in a general way, the laws end up failing because they tackle the imagined problem rather than the real problem.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. And there's been a lot of chat in the chat about the various ways and reports of looting and trafficking, and some suggestions here about what best to do to tackle the problem. Now, I know, and we mentioned during the introduction of this event, that one of the things that both of you are proposing for is more of a global approach to the issue. And Isba, I might come to you first to talk a little bit about this, the failures of this kind of local firefighting versus joined up approach. And of course, pass back to Neil following on. But Isba, would you like to kick us off with what you might have as in terms of recommendations here?
Yeah, actually, the recommendation, some of those recommendations come, as I told, from experience. We need really to develop, a global international policy. We cannot just, just observing what is happening now in Ukraine. All the attention now about Ukraine and efforts to protect the cultural heritage in Ukraine, as it's the first time, happened a war. And where there is a problem, or there is a conflict, all the attention goes to the conflict. The destruction of heritage is continuing in the rest of the world. In Yemen, Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, nobody now talking about that, about what is happening. So we need really to develop tools in order to deal with this problem and to be prepared after something happened. So we cannot just look to one conflict and then act because of this conflict. The media and the attention of the media, it's also, as Neil said, it's affecting the policy making. So we need really to look at this as one international big problem. The role of international law. The law of international law, we can see how there are so many gaps in the international law. UNESCO and its partners just deal with organized government. So how, if we want to deal with combat illicit traffic in areas under the Islamic opposition group in northwest Syria, what is the role of UNESCO? What is the role of the 1970 convention? It's the same thing in areas where the Houthi in Yemen or the other Donbass, Donetsk region in Ukraine. Now we know that there are a lot of looting in Mariupol and Mitropol and other regions and in different museums in Ukraine. So this is really big gaps in the international law. On the other hand, we really need to work with locals. To track this, we need to develop as much as possible initiatives in which they empower locals. All the, and that's what we are trying with Neil. To try to empower Syrians and local Syrians to work on the study on illicit traffic and to control and to try. Me as Syrian, why all of these issues are just with the experts in Europe or United States? Why there are no Syrians? Why there are no Iraqis or Yemenis or other who are working on that? On the other hand, it's very important to work with the media, especially the local medias, and to train as well journalists on the ground in these countries in order how they can report, how they can do all of these things, because the media in our countries is far away of using or they don't know how they can work on that. So there are a lot of recommendations. We need to create an international group, international center, whatever, and not with just limited funding. It needs to be like a center just working on that, and also in a very sustainable and way. What is happening? Some of these projects are just funded because once the funding is finished, there is no more work. These issues and all the recommendation we have a paper published last year, I and Neil and other colleagues on this about how we can tackle these problems. I mean, there is this paper I will share with in the chat. So like that, there is more knowledge about this, about the policy recommendation.
Thank you, Isbeh. And yes, please do drop that in the chat for some further reading for people. Neil, do you want to contribute to this idea of the big global approach?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I'm sure lots of people who are participating, they can come up with a few names of big international dealers. These are kind of intermediaries, if you like, and we all know who they are and where they are. And they're trafficking in material from several different countries. Well, if you just focus on the traffic of material from one country at a time, you're not going to affect these people. Whereas if you focus on taking out the big fish, you could potentially protect the heritage of several different countries at once. So I think you need to have a global approach. If you just think we're going to target Syrian antiquities or we're just going to target Iraqi antiquities, you just leave all the other antiquities from the other countries exposed. So you really have to say we're just going to target antiquities generally, and we're going to go after the people who are dealing in these antiquities. I think following up what Isbeh was saying about the centre, I mean, I'm concerned, and I know other people are concerned, and this is in Europe I'm talking about now, there is a fundamental lack of capacity in terms of understanding of the issue and of people who can do proper, research into the issue. When I talk about proper research, I'm talking about interdisciplinary comparative research, and those people just don't exist. So what you find is, if you find like somebody will fund a large research project, the people just aren't there really to conduct the research. And then the research project ends and they all just go away again. So it's not building capacity at all. So there needs to be somehow, and I don't know how you do it, but there needs to be some sustained financial support to build capacity in a lasting way. And then you might then get more, you might get the evidence that you need or you want to answer all the questions that everybody is asking. And I can't possibly answer because I don't know all the answers. So there is a need for capacity building in Europe, and I'm sure in North America and other areas of the world as well. So it's not just capacity building in Syria or wherever. We need to build capacity at home as well.
It's a really insightful comment. Thank you, Neil, and Isbeh as well. That's a really nice place for the conversation to be moving towards. And I have to say a huge thank you to so many people dropping in links into the chat and sort of expanding the conversation beyond today's event. I think there are definitely some questions left to be answered in the chat, so I'm not going to try and group all of them together, but perhaps we can get some sort of final comments here. One thing that we've probably should have talked about slightly earlier on in the conversation is a question that's come through the chat here around the role of both middle countries and middlemen, for want of a better term. This idea that objects aren't simply evaporate from the ground in Syria and end up in Western markets, but they travel through different countries as well. Did your research show evidence of that? And also Alia's question here about her experiences in Lebanon as well sort of points to these stories from local communities who are selling because they don't trust foreigners or governments, just to refer back to that question. And just to squeeze Salma's question on as well at the end, were any of the pieces shown in your presentations retrieved or returned to Syria through a process of investigation? So yeah, it's a big question to give you about 2 minutes to answer, Neil, but I'll come back to you first, and just to speak broadly about the role of middle countries and middlemen in the illicit trafficking chain.
Yeah, I forgot what the question was now.
Do they exist, and what's their role? That's my fault.
They do exist. I mean, it was interesting in the research that we conducted for the paper. There was evidence there of an intermediary who was based in the Emirates, who had representatives, if you like, on the ground in northeastern Syria before Daesh were there. And after they were there, so you had there an intermediary based in the United Arab Emirates who was trading with people on the ground in Syria before and during the Daesh occupation. So that's the type of people you're looking at, really. If you look north, it's quite clear there's a lot of the material was going north out of Syria, and everybody knows that. But no one's really been doing the research into Turkey or into Bulgaria. There are lots of seizures in these countries, lots of material being seized, and yet there doesn't seem to be any follow-up, really. Who was moving it? What material exactly is being seized? Was anybody arrested? I mean, who knows? I don't know. But these are the questions that need answering, really. We need to be able to follow these chains and look at the broader international involvement. We all talk about a transnational organised crime, probably is, but we never really investigated it as a transnational organised crime. We investigated it as a cultural heritage problem. So I think there are lots of issues there about the intermediaries, and I can't give very many sensible answers, really.
Okay, and just to bring things to a close, Isba, do you have any final comments on the role of middlemen, middle countries, and breaking the chain in the middle?
Yeah, actually, I mean, since years, I and Neil, we were able to identify some of the people who are based in the Gulf, and even we know, and some of the people reported that there are people, official people from Gulf countries, they are coming to the Turkish border in order to buy looted artifacts. I mean, this is a big problem as well. We know that the Gulf countries, they're like important, they play an important role on the chain, because, and recently you see that the Louvre Abu Dhabi is also caused by included artifact in illegal way. So this is really big problem. I mean, we need, again, the laws in Dubai or in those countries, they are not connected to the international law. And so we really need to make a big movement internationally, and with policy makers from the EU, from the governments, to really try to find and to control this, because otherwise, it will be the same, because we, if we fight it in Europe, but then they go to Dubai, from Dubai to Hong Kong, and from Hong Kong to Kuala Lumpur. So we need really to create, a system in which the international law could apply in all the places.
Thank you, Isba, and that really brilliantly actually brings the conversation today to a close. I'm going to have to draw a line under it somewhere, although I'm sure we could carry on for much longer given the opportunity. So firstly, and probably finally as well, I'd like to say a huge thank you to both of you today. It's been a really insightful exploration of your research, and also your findings and your opinions as well, and it's been amazing, frankly amazing, to see the role of the audience really shaping up, and not only starting conversations but seemingly answering their own questions too. So that kind of self-generated collaboration is just wonderful to see. Culture in Crisis is going to be back on the 22nd of June for our first in-person event in a really long time. So if you're in the South Ken area, please do drop by. For more importantly, we'll be continuing the conversation as well. So if you'd like to reach out, I'm going to drop in the Culture in Crisis email. So if you haven't had your question answered today and you would like to get in touch with myself, Neil, or Isba, please do just drop me a quick email at that email account, just flying up the screen now as everyone chimes in. It's lovely to see. So just to finally say thank you so much to Neil, Isba, and our audience today. Let's hopefully see you all again soon for another Culture in Crisis event, and please do keep the conversation going in the meantime. So thanks again, and everyone stay safe and well. Goodbye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.